Hey guys, welcome back. It doesn't really look like it out here, but we're actually filming this video in mid-March. We got hit with snow again last night. It's pretty windy out. The temperatures dropped to about 20 degrees, so it feels like another winter day here in West Michigan. And even though I'm ready for the weather to kind of turn around, get a little bit warmer, I am glad that it snowed just because for the topic of today's video, it'll help me with one of the points. And the topic that I want to talk about today for you guys is a few tips when you're out there trying to look for shed antlers. We're still running cameras on our properties, and right now, around mid-March, we can see that when we're viewing those pictures and videos that most of the bucks have in fact dropped their antlers. They've shed their antlers. There's one buck for sure that's still holding at least one of his sides, but again, most of the deer or most of the bucks have dropped their antlers. So now is a good time, if you're interested in shed hunting, to go out there and start looking for sheds. However, even though most of those bucks have in fact shed their antlers, it's still going to be fairly difficult to locate them on your property. And that's what I want to talk about in today's video are a few tips to hopefully help you guys find more of those antlers on your property. And within the video, I do want to talk about a couple different things. First, just a few general tips as it relates to shed hunting. And then after that, dive into actually some of the better locations on your property to find those shed antlers. So first, let's talk about a couple general tips as it relates to shed hunting. And guys, I gotta throw my glasses on here. It's really bright, all this snow. I don't normally wear glasses when I film, but it is really bright out here today. So gotta throw these on. My emergency sunglasses. All right. Oh, that's way better. All right. So first, let's just talk about a couple general tips as it relates to shed hunting. The first thing that's so important to find shed antlers on your property is the deer have to be on your property when they drop their antlers. Even if you have great winter habitat on your property, you have winter food, you have winter cover, if you are on your property a lot, doing habitat improvements, pushing these deer off your property, you are going to reduce the chances that you're going to be finding those sheds because those deer are probably dropping those sheds where they're spending more time. There's just a higher probability that they're going to drop their sheds somewhere else. So if you want to increase the chances that you're going to find sheds on your property, then you need to make sure that you are kind of staying off your property. Now, I do not do that. I would much rather be working on my property, improving my property, getting it ready for the upcoming season than to find a few antlers. If I find a couple antlers, that's great. But to me, again, it's fun to do with the family if my daughter can find a couple antlers. But I would much rather get those deer off my property just because I'm pushing them off when I'm doing habitat improvements as opposed to find a couple sheds. But if you want to increase the chances that you're finding sheds on your property, then you need to hold the deer on your property for a longer period of time just to, again, increase the probability that they're going to drop their antlers on your property. The second tip that I have for you guys to hopefully help you find more antlers on your property is, if you can, wait for the snow to melt. Again, we're in mid-March right now. We didn't have snow for the last couple days, but last night we got hit with snow. So this would not be a day that I would pick to go looking through my property to find sheds. You can absolutely find sheds in the snow, especially if they're larger, but a lot of the sheds that are out there are those 1.5-year-old sheds, especially on the properties here in Michigan. That's a lot of times what we're finding on our properties is those 1.5-year-old sheds. And a lot of those sheds are completely covered up by just a few inches of snow. So if you can, wait for the snow to melt. That's going to really increase your chances of finding those antlers that are on your property. But now let's talk about a few locations that you guys should be keying on to hopefully help you find more antlers. And when we're looking for shed antlers on our property, we really are taking a very similar approach to hunting in general. Throughout the hunting season, we're always shifting our approach depending on the patterns of the deer herd, right? Early season, the deer herd has different patterns than during October and November, and October and November, oftentimes those patterns are different than during the late season. You want to be adjusting your approach and your tactics as the deer herd changes their patterns. And shed hunting is no different. You want to be focusing on what the deer are doing now or when they're going to be dropping their antlers. And while we do have bucks that drop their antlers in December, in January, a lot of those bucks have gone through some sort of stress or trauma Most of the bucks that I see on our cameras are dropping them, late in January, throughout February, and early into March. That's when a lot of these bucks are dropping their antlers. So you want to be focusing your attention on the areas that the deer are using during that time frame. So anywhere from maybe mid-January to the end of February, or pushing into early March a little bit. And what you're going to notice is these areas all have a similar theme. They're all winter areas for the local deer herd. So what areas are we talking about specifically? I'll kind of go over 3 main areas you want to be focusing on your property. There are a lot of different areas kind of within these 3, but we'll kind of break it down into 3 general areas that you should be focusing on your property. And I would say that there are 2 areas that me personally, I have found more sheds in, and then this 3rd one, I found sheds here, but not nearly as often as the first 2. So we'll talk about the better ones first. And I have personally found the most shed antlers in a late season food source. And again, a late season food source can be a lot of different things. It really just depends on what's in your area. It could be a cut cornfield. It could be a bean field that was left standing. If you have a brassica plot on your property and it hasn't yet been wiped out, it still has food in January and February. Late season food sources are a great place to find shed antlers, and for me, historically have been the #1 place that I've found sheds. After the craziness of the rut and the stress that's associated with that, the hunting season, the harsh winter, these deer need to recover. So they're going to be spending a lot of time in these late season food sources. And remember, where the deer are spending more time, there's a higher probability that that's where those bucks are going to be dropping their antlers. Another great location to be scouting when you guys are looking for those antlers, and this is really close, a close second to #1, would be a late season bedding area. And there are a lot of different types of late season bedding areas. One of the most common is thermal cover. If you guys have a lot of conifers on your property, packed together, that's going to offer thermal protection for those deer. They like to huddle up in those areas throughout the winter to stay warm, conserve energy. And again, if they're spending a lot of time in there, there's just a higher probability that you're going to be finding shed antlers in those locations. Another good spot would be kind of the leeward side of a hillsides, south-facing slopes, or just really thick cover that those deer can get in and just kind of get out of the elements. If you can find a winter bedding location on your property, or if you know where the deer prefer to bed on your property, this is another area that I'd be searching pretty hard for those shed antlers. So far this season, into 2023, we found 3 sheds, all 1.5-year-old sheds. Let's see if I can get in my pocket here. 2 of them were found in a food source, and 1 of them was found in a bedding area. So I think this one here, this was found in a bedding area, and then this one here was found in a late season food source, and so was this one. This was found in a late season food source as well. By placing your time and your focus where these deer are spending more time, you just have a much higher probability of locating those shed antlers. Now, this doesn't mean that bucks only drop their antlers in food sources and bedding areas. Again, they're just spending more time in these areas, so there's a higher probability that that's where they're going to be dropping them. They drop their antlers, all over throughout the woods, and that's kind of what I want to talk about next. Is the last area you should be searching on your property when you're looking for these antlers. And for me, that's the deer trails. As these deer move from those bedding areas to the food sources, or from the food sources to the bedding areas, they're going to be taking the same trails over and over and over again. And this is a great place to look as you're transitioning from those food sources back to the bedding areas. So when you're searching that food source, hopefully you found a couple. If you haven't and you want to go to that bedding area next, don't just walk through the woods looking for antlers. Take the trail that the deer are taking to get from that food source to the bedding area. Now, I know that might seem like a no-brainer, but I've been shed hunting with some guys, and they're kind of just like walking through the woods looking for sheds. And while you do still have a chance of finding an antler this way, really bucks can drop them anywhere. You have a much higher probability of finding one if you're walking the trails that the deer are walking. But guys, for me personally, those are the top 3 locations that I historically have found sheds on my properties. #1 has been that late season food source, followed closely by the late season bedding area. And then I have found sheds, not as many as the first 2, but on those deer trails that connect that late season food source with that late season bedding area. And just to make sure that you guys do have enough places to search on your property, I will throw in 2 more spots that I have found sheds in the past. And the first one is a trail that kind of runs through or cuts through a ditch. This is a great place to find sheds for a couple reasons. One, because a lot of times with these ditch crossings, there's a preferred trail, so it consolidates movement. So you just have a higher probability that there's gonna be more deer going through that area because it's their preferred crossing. The second reason it's a good location for sheds is because as these deer run down that ditch or as they jump over it, there's going to be an impact as these deer are hitting the ground, and that could jostle those antlers loose. As, when these deer are walking through the woods, not a whole lot of jostling going around with their headgear, but as they hit the ground, when they run down that hill and come back up, or that ditch, or they jump over it, there's going to be an impact which could shake those antlers loose. Very similar to the ditch crossing, following the same themes, would be some sort of a preferred crossing over a fence. So if you know where these deer really like to cut over your fence, maybe your neighbor has a cattle pasture and they always jump over this particular spot on the fence, that's a great spot to look for those antlers. Again, because those deer, as they jump over and hit the ground, that might be enough impact as these antlers kind of get loose to knock them off their heads. So anywhere where those deer have to jump over something to continue down the trail that they want to move is a great place to look for antlers. And the last location that I want to talk about in this video follows the same themes of having the antlers getting knocked off the buck's head, and that would be a trail through really thick cover. Obviously, throughout the hunting season, these bucks are going to have no problem walking through these trails. That cover is not going to knock the antlers off their head. But during the late winter, late January, throughout February, and into March, when these antlers start to loosen up and they're about to fall off, it doesn't really take much sometimes for these antlers to get knocked off. So as these bucks kind of take those same trails that they're used to taking, if it's through thick cover, that might be enough to knock one off. So if you have a trail on your property that kind of snakes through really nasty cover, that's another one that I'd be walking to hopefully find an antler. But guys, quick video today. That's going to wrap it up for this one. If you guys do have any questions on shed hunting or any questions in general, please drop those in the comment section below. I'll get back to those as soon as I can, and we will see you guys in the next video.